Here we are between two sprints, had to show it off, bang, with our guest of honor today, Matt Hobbs, but his government name is technically Logan. You learn something new every single day, but he is currently the reconditioning coordinator and performance therapist for the Cleveland Browns. He spent some time at the U, at Northwestern, where I had the pleasure of shaking his hand, and also at Nebraska as the director of football RTP. And you start at the U, and then you just get colder and colder and colder. What is up with that, Logan, Matt Hobbs?
Yeah, that certainly wasn't the goal. I'm from Charlotte, so whenever I walked outside yesterday and there was snow on the ground here in Cleveland, I was like, I thought this was supposed to be spring, but it is what it is. Kind of taking the leap with every opportunity, and every opportunity has kind of led me to a good spot. So it has progressively gotten colder. Hopefully, no calls from Alaska or anything, but we'll see. We'll see.
For sure. So thank you very much for joining today. Adam, welcome, my fearless co-host. So Matt, how are you doing today? Thank you again for joining. Anything about your background that I missed? But if not, we will get into it.
No, I mean that's pretty spot on. I think the other one is I met Adam while I was at Nebraska, so had the pleasure of meeting you guys both before, and then kind of stayed in contact since.
Fantastic. Let's go. So I'm super excited to get into how the 1080, hardware, software, tech, everything in between has kind of helped you as a practitioner,
Mm-hmm.
and also just you've gotten better yourself over the years, making it to the show, or at least in
Yeah.
baseball we call it the show. Not sure what football calls the NFL, but super super cool. So take us through kind of the past, the background, your familiarity with 1080, if you remember first kind of getting your hands on it, and kind of just set the scene for this kind of 1080X Matt Hobbs talk.
Yeah. So I was first kind of exposed to the idea of the 1080 whenever I was at Miami. Never had access to one, but I was on the 1080 website watching every lecture that was available. I felt like I knew a bunch about the 1080, and then one got dropped in my lap, and I had no idea what to do with it. I was like, I knew the theory behind a lot of this stuff, but the first exposure that I had to was with Ryan Jarima at Northwestern, and it was the OG Sprint, and you had to lug it around, and I was like, I mean, this is really cool, but can we have somebody else carry this? And so it was the first exposure that I had to it, and I was like, all right, there's a lot to unpack here, but there's a lot of value here. Take that into going to Nebraska, where I met Adam for the first time, saw the Sprint 2 got released, was really excited about the prospect of it, not only from being able to acquire a lot of that data, being able to train with it regularly, but also just like how many things that you can do with it, right? I mean, from if you're going to force velocity profile somebody on the field to you're going to hook it up to the rack and work on isokinetic, whatever you want to do. I knew there was a lot of versatility with it. And then that's where I like really started to dive into the weeds, was at Nebraska with the Sprint 2. And a lot of that stuff was pretty surface level. I was still kind of dipping my toe into the water, looking into just a lot of linear sprinting, force velocity profiling, load velocity profiling, all that stuff. And I remember talking to Adam last year at the summit. I was deep into the Thomas Dos Santos research, deep into the Damian Harper research, and trying to look at different ways of, the little ring on the front of the 1080. It's kind of like a funnel. I was like, I feel like I can do different angles of direction change than the 180 degree turn. So I started to look into utilizing the 505 and tagging it as different angles. So looking into what a 90 degree direction change looks like, what a 135, what the 180 looks like, how those step characteristics are different. And didn't get too far down the path with it before I ended up coming here to Cleveland, but it was something that like sparked the interest. I was like, you look into the DeSantos research, and the angle of direction change dictates the force output for your step pattern. Is it the anti-penultimate? Is the penultimate? Is the plant step? What is it? I wanted to see if I could get that output with the 1080. Again, didn't get as far down the rabbit hole as I would have liked to. It's still kind of like surface level, and honestly something I think about pretty regularly. But that's where I was kind of trending with it. And then I got here in December of 24 and was super fired up that they already had a Sprint 2. Had to go dust it off. I was like, you guys aren't using this thing? I use this for everything. And then from there, we actually we took the Sprint 1 that they had, traded it in, got another sprint 2. So we've got 2 of those. And this time of year, it's one of those things that we roll out to the field every single day because someone is going to be using it in some sort of capacity, whether it is resisted sprint training, assisted sprint training, decel, change of direction work. We know it's going to be used, so we go ahead and wheel those guys out there. Like I said, fortunately, it's a little bit lighter than the sprint 1, so we can wheel them in and out pretty quick. But I've used it, from the field perspective to the weight room perspective, and honestly, like what my job asks me to do is the reconditioning, the return to play. And so finding unique variations and unique ways to utilize it has been the really fun part. It's kind of matching the art to the science.
That'll be a great segue into the kind of present now. So you've had an interesting background of, although technically they've all had kind of that RTP reconditioning kind of title, you've been in the weight room in a more traditional kind of performance S&C kind of role. And you've said those words like FVP, LVP, a little bit more of the performance-y type things. And super interesting kind of anecdote with reading the research and then applying it. And you're like, oh, wow, I guess I can do different angles and stuff. So now bridging the gap into applying the sprint in less of a performance capacity and more of an RTP capacity, even though the P is performance or play. But could you take us through the present and a little bit more of those RTP type things where you are one-on-one, where you can get a little bit more kind of in the weeds, where you can create super specific horizontal loading and kind of things like that. So let's dive into RTP. I guess I'll leave that open and go crazy.
You could peel back that a number of different ways. I think the one that has garnered the most attention, because at the end of the day too, I can come up with an idea that I think is great, and one of these guys does it, and they're like, Hobbs, what are you thinking? Like, this is stupid. And then I have to find a different way to accomplish the task. But I think one that has received a lot of good feedback, and I use it a ton in post-operative knees, is, thinking down the line of, especially in the ACL world, what are they going to struggle with? Like knowing what, from a running mechanics perspective, they're going to struggle with. What do they look like in acceleration? What do they look like in deceleration, max velocity, and starting to try to mimic some of those positions very early. And so I think one of the ones that guys have really enjoyed is what we call 1080 projections. And so it's moving through kind of the segue of, all right, we're only doing concentric, now we're doing eccentric, now we're going to make this isokinetic. And I think that progression makes a lot of sense too, because whenever we look at a lot of our post-op ACLs, what are we doing for their return to sport clearance? We're probably doing an isokinetic test with them, right, to see what their strength output is. And that can be extremely unfamiliar to people. So even if it is not the same knee extension isokinetic test, they have an exposure to isokinetics in general, and they know what some of these things feel like. And so like the 1080 projections is just set to mimic the acceleration position. Having them kind of pin their shin down, keeping their knee lower for longer, and having to load their quad and project through their hip. Because what we see oftentimes is they're going to try to get that knee as straight as possible, as fast as possible, right? They don't want to load the quad. They want to use just the hip and the ankle to help themselves project. And some of them are really good at it. But what opportunities do we have to slow down this motion? And there are concentric reps that we'll do that take you 30 seconds to complete. It's, I know that you have the capacity to do this in half a second, but we're going to own this position and we're going to get very comfortable with this position. And we're slowly going to start to trim that time down. That way the velocity component becomes a little bit more increased. And seeing a lot of really good success. I think it just decreases the learning curve for acceleration positions, especially in like steps 1 to 3, where they're able to get it a little bit faster than had we not exposed them to those positions at all.
So as you're going from kind of intro to that exercise, some of the 30-second reps to the kind of fast, higher velocities, what are those actual velocities? What are the coaching cues that you give? If we could do a little deep dive into this exercise specifically, that'd be super cool.
Yeah, so I think from, a cueing perspective is I really like, I've dove way too deep in the Rob Gray rabbit hole and the constraints-led approach, like letting them figure it out on their own. and creating an environment in which they have the ability to do that, and then slowly lifting the constraints. So there will be some non-negotiables of like, hey, this is how we set this drill up. It is up to you to determine how you find your solution. And so whether that's, we want to pin the shin down, I might put a little hurdle or a wicket directly below the knee, and they hold their knee on that wicket as long as they can before they have to project. And so it's like it's less cueing and more environment creation for those guys. Because again, I think that from a motor learning perspective, they benefit from that a lot more versus me saying, hey, drop your knee. Okay, your hip's a little bit too high. Because I've done that before, and I could use that same cue for 4 months in a row and it doesn't click. And I've just had a lot more success on the constraint side of things. So for me, it's like creating an environment for them to find success on their own, while also operating within the bandwidths of this still needs to look like an acceleration. We're not doing broad jumps or anything like that. And so from a velocity perspective, it's as simple as just trimming the time. It's, once we feel and once they feel competent in that movement pattern, we've lifted the constraints, we're going to start trimming the time. So we can start doing less time under tension-based work and slowly going from 30 to 15 to 5 to, all right, now you're letting it rip. And so it's less scientific in that perspective, but it's just, again, going back to environment creation and then just slowly trimming time, allowing them to operate faster. And again, you might get to the point where you're at the 5-second point and they're going back to some of those old movement mechanics that you don't want. And that's just like, all right, well, we're going to drop back down to 15, hit that a little bit, and then we're going to slowly make our way forward. I'd like to say that it's all linear, but that would definitely be a lie. So every once in a while, you kind of have to bounce back and forth a little bit.
Sure. No, these are really interesting. It sounds like a webinar to me, Matt. That's what it sounds like to me.
That's cool.
Like,
that's cool with me.
Getting into those weeds and start, because it's really intuitive of you to put that in. What kind of baseline testing are you looking at? Because obviously you're doing the return to play side, but are there things as a staff that you guys work on with the 1080 specifically so that if they do get injured, that you have some data to compare to? Or are you doing it all, hey, they've gotten hurt, we're just diving in and following your progressions?
So at this point in time, there hasn't been any 1080 baseline testing. Ask me again in 2 weeks, and it'll likely be a little bit different. So it's our plan is to force velocity profile a lot of these guys as a baseline, and then also have that information help dictate what we're doing on some of our on-field training sessions.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Will you think about, like, when you were at Nebraska, you were digging into some of the 505 stuff? That might be a future thing that you're looking deeper into, that just doing linear right now.
Yep. Yeah, I think it's, I think the easiest way to attack it is, all right, let's get everyone exposed to it. Let's introduce the concept. And then as long as everyone's on board, we'll continue to dig deeper and deeper and deeper until we find, what we're really looking for.
Yeah, I think that's really wise. And I've learned that from other practitioners in the same seats you're sitting in, of, hey, this still is pretty new stuff to a lot of guys. Yeah. And to get comfortable, get really good at one thing. Don't just, like, you can still be very involved on that one thing and get a lot of information, like step analysis and looking at left-right differences, but also just to have some baseline data just makes people feel comfortable. Okay, where does that fit in that return to play decision-making tool?
Absolutely.
So I think that's really good to hear, that's on the to-do list very soon.
Yeah, it's exciting.
And then if we want to bounce to more late stage RTP, super interesting about the projections and the kind of early kind of post-op stuff. What have you found? So like you have the multi-angle kind of COD stuff, being able to create those specific forces, that horizontal loading. But what else have you found in that more late stage RTP? Like assisted sprinting is always an interesting topic. Or is it like geared to super heavy, let's just run and go? Like when it's, a few weeks out of being fully kind of back, what have been a few of the things that you've really enjoyed or seen a lot of kind of bang for buck for?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you bring up assisted sprinting. I think it's one of those things that for a long time, like a lot of people were like, I don't know, it seems a little sketchy. And then, started implementing it with some of the guys here. And and like filming it simultaneously, right? Like, because it's the fine balance of, okay, like we're reaching higher speeds. I know what this is going to do from an adaptation standpoint, but if this is really ruining the way that you run physically, like that's how I'm kind of manipulating the load, right? Where it's like, again, for right now, it's a little bit of a guessing game because it's still kind of dipping my toe into the water of assisted sprinting. But to this point, seeing a lot of success with it. I was like, after the first session, and I'm watching him run and I'm watching his outputs, like we kind of set it up as like a contrasting sprint setup. So he would do a resisted sprint at 25% VDEC. He would go unresisted and then assisted. And so it was that 3 exercise rotation. Again, just like trying to peel back the layers, the same contrast method that we use in the weight room. And then what I started to see is like his unresisted sprint outputs from like just pure velocity started to take off. And I was like, all right, well, I can't definitively say that this is the assisted sprinting. I also can't say that it wasn't. So like it's been something that like starting to dip my toe in the water with, and it's been really fun starting to see some really cool things on the other end. But it's definitely a newer topic for me, for sure. I was very much like a lot of people where it's like, seems a little sketchy. I don't know if this is the right population. And then I started with like 3 kilos of assistance. You know, I was like, this seems appropriate. We'll see what this does. And it's like kinematically, based on all the film that I've had on him before, I was like, no, like he's running the way that we'd want him to. He's just reaching a higher speed threshold. And so I was like, all right, I think there's some merit to this.
What kind of distance are you doing for assisted?
He was at 25 yards to start.
25 yards, 3 kg. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Taking that to the next level now, because you're in a unique position on return to play with grown athletes that this is their job. They're pros. Can you talk a little bit about what the experience is for the athlete, getting some of the numbers that you can report to them on, okay, you are ready to go, or this is what we're seeing, or this is where we need to clean up before we unlock you at the next level? Maybe just your experience having that data readily available and sharing that with the athlete.
I think a lot of that is like everywhere I've been, guys want to know how fast they're running. You know, they don't care what their acceleration is. They're like, I don't even know what that is. Like, who cares about power and a broad jump? And it's like, well, I care about it, you know, like, so it's explaining to them what some of these things are, right? So it's like, everyone knows intuitively what miles per hour are. They're like, oh, I hit 20, I hit 21. It's like, okay, cool, we're going the right direction. But there's been instances too where they hit 20, 21 miles per hour for 3 weeks in a row, and they're like, I'm not getting better. And it's like, well, look at your 5-yard split, look at your 10-yard split, look at your max acceleration. And it's like kind of showing them through experience what some of these metrics are. And it's like, just because that output may not be increasing doesn't mean we're not getting the correct training stimulus, right? And I think too, being upfront with them of like, what is the goal of this block? What is the goal of this training program? These are what we're trying to see. And I think that's benefited a lot. The cases where, you know, you've got guys that only care about speed, you know, you got to kind of throw them a bone every once in a while. It's like, you know, we've only had flights that were 15 plus 10 programmed, but the only thing you want to see is speed, go sprint 30 yards. And it's like, okay, you hit a new top speed. It's like, so it's like kind of, again, like working with them a little bit, because it's not like college again, where it's like, hey, what I say goes. It's very much like, this is a collaborative environment, and having them be as involved and as informed in the decision-making process is extremely valuable.
Very cool. Very cool. So last question, we'll go kind of future moving forwards. So we'll keep this tight though. Being productive and helpful, what do you think the NFL or higher level college football can do better? / if you had to give 3 rabbit holes to dive down, I guess I'll fill in one for you. That would be the multi-angle kind of COD.
Yeah.
You know, if it's like, oh, I think it'd be super cool if we all had this in our baseline testing, or this, a little bit more like in a perfect world, what would you recommend for those kind of people in higher level football?
Yeah, I think off the rip, it's something that is certainly gaining more attention, and I think for all the right reasons. So like we talk about multi-direction 505s and stuff like that. I think there's value in that, like as you alluded to. But I think from something that's easy to administer is an ADA, right? Like, what is your deceleration capacity? And I think more and more programs, more and more clubs are adopting that mindset. I think when you just look at injury incidence rates, especially in non-contact injuries, like, where are they happening, right? Like, shouldn't we have something that gives us some more insight from a baseline testing perspective? And I think that's an easy way to do it. So I think deceleration off the rip, like I said, it's gaining more attention, as it should. I think we still have some progress to be made, you know? So I think that one is probably the biggest one. I completely forgot the other part of your question.
No, that is quite. If people were crushing multi-directional COD, they messed around with some isokinetic kind of one steps or projections, and they dove into kind of the ADA, that would be some super nice kind of homework. So you crushed that. Don't worry. Don't worry.
All
So that is all we have time for today. We're a little bit north of 20 minutes if my math is correct. But Adam, I'll let you hop in if there's anything else. But if not, I want to say thank you very much for your time. I will roll out the gold carpet for you, my friend, to shamelessly plug, emphasis on shameless, where people can find you if they want to reach out, and just where can they get more of Coach Matt Hobbs?
Yeah, I think so. I get like some Instagram follow requests. It's kind of like a person. I'm not a post exercises on my Instagram guy. So LinkedIn and Twitter are probably the best, or I guess it's called X now. I'm kind of dating myself. But
I still
Matt
call it
Hobbs,
Twitter. Don't worry.
yeah, Matt Hobbs DPT on Twitter, and then Logan Matt Hobbs on LinkedIn. Probably be the easiest ways to find me. Those are definitely more of like a professional situation. But yeah, those are probably the two best platforms.
Fantastic. So thank you very much again for your time, and I'm looking forward to the next one.